Welcome back. This is Bando's Breakdowns episode 32. My name is Zain Bando. Thank you again for joining me on this Wednesday afternoon. The first full week of December is finally here. So again, we're getting very, very close to the new year. We're also getting into the home stretch of the NFL season. We're getting very, very close to college football bowl season and college football playoff season, as well as the end of the UFC schedule. So thank you very much for joining me. We have a lot of exciting stuff to get to today. But before we get into anything, though, I just wanted to remind you guys to please be sure to like and subscribe to the Empty the Bench Podcast Network on YouTube. You can do so at youtube.com/ETB Network. Would be very much appreciated. We're getting closer and closer to 1,000 subscribers, so every like, share, save in your algorithm really does help because it helps me make more content like this, and it also helps all the other shows out as well to help them build more content and build their audiences too. So if you like what you see today, please be sure to go to youtube.com/ETB Network. Also, on the contrary to that, please be sure to listen to Bando's Breakdowns wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Acast, YouTube Premium, and so much more. It would be really greatly appreciated if you supported me over on the audio-only side as well, because the audio-only side is important because it allows you to listen to the show in sort of like a radio-only format. So if you're on the road, if you're going to get your morning coffee, if you're at work, if you're doing whatever, you can put your earbuds in. Be sure to listen to me over there. If you don't want to see me or you simply don't have time to see me, that seems to be preferential for some people that I do know. So please be sure to add me to your podcast feeds. That way you don't miss a single episode of Bando's Breakdowns. And the good news is that it comes out a few hours earlier than the video-only side. So if you want me a little earlier, you can do so on the audio-only side as well. So it'd be greatly appreciated. Please be sure to follow the show across social media at Bando's Breakdown. That's on Instagram, X, and TikTok. It would be very much appreciated if you did that. You can also follow my personal account at SamBando99 across social media platforms, including Instagram and Twitter, as it scrolls across the screen. And I would be remiss if I did not remind you all that Bando's Breakdowns in every single show on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network is presented by Playback. They've been a wonderful sponsor to us. We're starting to get back into the groove of doing NBA games. We just had a stream the other night. I'm pretty sure it was now Monday night. We also have streams coming up tomorrow. So we have a lot of stuff going on the Playback front when it comes to NBA. So if you like NBA content, please be sure to check us out over on playback.tv/ETB Network. So without further ado, here we go. Presented by Playback, watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience, from playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. And again, to re-emphasize that, please go to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule, which is going to be packed with content. Not only is it going to be packed with content, but we're also bringing back Fight Study for UFC 310. So if you want to see Tom and I break down all the happenings of the main and co-main event that's taking place in Las Vegas this weekend, join us Friday morning, just in the middle or right before the official morning weigh-ins to cover those fights as well. And we might end up reacting to the weights based on the timing of how everything works out. So please be sure to stay tuned for all that and so much more. But for now, let's get into the show because we have a packed show this week. Just to get into what we're going to be discussing, we're going to be talking about all the main college football conference championships that are taking place across the country in all the major Power Four conferences. So we'll be talking about that. We're also going to be talking about the NFL and the upcoming slate. We're going to be getting into my thoughts on Matt Eberflus' firing. If you want more details on that, you can go to the YouTube side and check out the impromptu live stream I did with Grant Winsauer. You may know him from Grant's Game Day. You may also know him from Football Forecast. So if you want our initial reaction to the news of Eberflus' firing, you can go check that out, but I'll give my own brief analysis there. We're going to talk about Illinois and its win against Northwestern. We're also going to try to dissect who Illinois could be playing in the Citrus Bowl in Orlando, Florida on New Year's Eve, and so much more. So without further ado, let's get into it. College football conference championship games or coming up this weekend. It's the CFB Championship preview, as I like to coin it here. So there's a lot of college football going on this weekend. So we're going to start with the first game on the docket. It's a pretty big one, and one that I think a lot of people were very, very surprised occurred, is considering all of the results that took place over the weekend. So I'm going to try to break that down. So starting in Indianapolis, the Big Ten Championship game, Oregon versus Penn State. It's not the matchup everybody was expecting from a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to explain why. Oregon had already clinched their spot in the Big Ten Championship as of early last week, so that was already known. What wasn't known, though, was who Oregon was going to play. So here was the scenario going into Saturday. So you had Ohio State taking on Michigan. If Ohio State had beat Michigan, the matchup would have been the rematch, Oregon versus Ohio State. Because Ohio State lost to Michigan, that opened the door for Penn State and Indiana. But Penn State's scenario was a little bit easier. All Penn State needed to do was beat Maryland. That's exactly what they did, 44-7 in State College. So therefore, Penn State is in on the final day of the Big Ten regular season, despite losing to Ohio State early last month. So that is the Big Ten Championship here this Saturday from Indianapolis, only on CBS. It's the first time in the history of the conference that the two best teams in the conference will be facing each other for the championship. You have to remember, in previous years, it was either the Big Ten East or the Big Ten West or the Legends and Leaders divisions, where the winners of those divisions would face each other. And some years, it truly wasn't the two best teams. With the new 18-team league, that is changing now. So number one is playing literal number two, whether you like it or not. Just to break this game down a little bit, we have a lot of exciting stars on both sides of the ball. We got Dylan Gabriel for Oregon at quarterback, probably one of the best quarterbacks in the country, having a very quietly good season, taking on Drew Aller, who's really, really transformed Penn State's offense into one of the most lethal in the country. This team knows how to score points at will. They're very, very exciting to watch, and their defense, especially, is even better, led by Abdul Carter, who might actually end up being a first-round NFL pick next year if he chooses to opt for the NFL draft, which he probably will. I think this game is going to be one in the trenches. I think Oregon is the better football team, though. I think they'll be able to run the ball against Penn State. I think it's going to come down to who has more stamina left in the fourth quarter and who has the ball last. I think it's going to be a Penn State mistake that cost them a Big Ten championship win, and I think Oregon's going to get it done. Very close game here, 34-27 is going to be my final score. I just think Oregon has a little bit too much talent on both sides of the ball to be able to beat Penn State, and I also think that Oregon, having beat Ohio State, and to me playing some stiffer competition, no disrespect to Penn State, but having a win against Ohio State versus Penn State, not having really a legitimate win against the top 25 opponent, maybe outside of Illinois, I think is a huge drawback for the Nittany Lions. So give me Oregon to win, be the unanimous number one team in the country, and guarantee its spot in the college football playoff. As we all know, too, just to give you some clarity on this, at the time that this is being recorded, the new rankings have yet to be released, but by the time you'll see this, the new rankings will be out. Expect Oregon to still remain number one. I don't see much movement from the Penn State side either, so we may get identical rankings as we did a week ago, just given that Oregon did finish the regular season undefeated. Penn State finished it with one loss. So give me Oregon in the Big Ten Championship in Indianapolis to win the game and clinch in my opinion, the number one overall seed in the college football playoffs. Will give me Oregon in the Big Ten Championship to start. We're going to move on to the SEC Championship. It is Texas versus Georgia Part 2. These two teams played each other in mid-October, with Georgia winning the game in very, very impressive fashion. Georgia needed a bunch of overtimes to knock off Georgia Tech to keep its SEC championship hopes alive from a record standpoint. It obviously looks better now on the record, considering that they're a 2-loss team now instead of a 3-loss team. Texas clinched its spot in the SEC championship with a win on the road in College Station against Texas A&M in a defensive slugfest. That was 17-7 or at Kyle Field really did silence that crowd there. I thought it was going to be a better game. Unfortunately for A&M, it was not. And they unfortunately underperformed. But this should be a great game. These are two SEC heavyweights, if you will. I think they've got talent on both sides of the ball, very very similar to the last game. And again, I think it's going to come down to, can Carson Beck remain clutch when he needs to be. There were a couple of throws in that Georgia Tech game where he kind of got bailed out, thankfully, from his perspective. A lot of people thought that Georgia probably should have lost to Georgia Tech, and they obviously didn't. So I think it's going to be very similar to the last time these two teams played. I think it's going to be a slugfest. There may be some chippiness. I don't think there's going to be any bottles on the field in this one, but I do think that both fan bases are really going to get into it. I think it's going to be a wild ending. I think Texas wins this game. I think it goes to overtime. I think it's a thrilling ending, and I think Georgia gets heartbroken. I do think, though, that very similarly to the last game, I do think that with Georgia's resume and just with some of the teams that they played this year, I do think, depending on how they fare in this game, that it may just be enough for them to get in. There's a lot of controversy around, who are going to be the last few teams to get in at 10-2. I think Georgia, with a loss, is going to be on the outside looking in, but I think it'll also depend on the next game that we're going to discuss to see if Georgia has any chance. So give me Texas to win this game. I think their defense bails them out, and regardless of if it's Ewers or Arch Manning, I think the quarterbacks are going to make a huge difference in this one, and I think it's just going to be a couple more throws than Georgia, very similarly to Penn State, Oregon, that I think is going to get the job done. So give me Texas to win the SEC championship and clinch its spot in the college football playoff as well. The ACC championship, this is a bit of a shocking one. Clemson loses to South Carolina, but still gets in to the ACC championship game thanks to Syracuse upsetting Miami. Clemson taking on SMU. SMU, one of the best stories in college football, a team that no one expected to be as good as they are. This could be a passing of the torch game here. I mean, I think a lot of people, are kind of discounting Dabo Swinney. Does he still have the flair that he did all those years ago when he had Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson? I think we're going to find out. I do think that Cade Klubnik is a good quarterback, but again, I just think this SMU team is on a different level. I think they've shocked the college football world. They've won some really nice games earlier in the season. I think they're catching Clemson at the wrong time. I think Clemson sneaking in to the playoff, or excuse me, to the ACC championship is just an indicament of what this new format, kind of allows. I think we're now rewarding losing than anything else. And I understand that South Carolina is an SEC team, but when you're at home and you're the higher ranked opponent and you lose, that says a whole heck of a lot. So I like SMU to win this game. I just think that Swinney, I don't know if the game's passed him by or not, but Clemson just hasn't shown me enough to justify picking them, especially when, they're getting blown out, you know, by teams like Georgia and everything else. And quite frankly, they played honestly quite an easier schedule than many people would have expected. So I just think SMU is the better story. I think SMU getting into the playoff, I think, causes a lot of interesting parity, especially depending on who it may play in the first round of the playoffs. So I really like SMU to get in. I think Clemson is going to be one of these teams that is going to be left out of the conversation just because I don't really think they have that resume building win that puts them over the edge for me. I mean, losing to both Louisville and South Carolina, I think is a bad look, and also getting blown up by Georgia, I think is even remotely worse. So I think Clemson is going to have an uphill battle, and I think SMU is going to do enough to win this game. And then the other game that not a whole lot of people are really talking about and giving love to, the Big 12 championship, Iowa State versus Arizona State. Two very interesting programs. I mean, Kenny Dillingham has Arizona State rolling right now. They've won a bunch of nice games in a row. Iowa State has really turned a corner thanks to Kansas State really faltering late in the year. They just beat Kansas State this past week. This is going to be a slugfest. I think both of these teams are very similar. I think they're evenly matched, but I just think Arizona State, as long as they have Scadaboo 100% healthy, I think this is Arizona State's game to take here. I just don't think Iowa State has enough offensive firepower that really jumps out to me. And maybe this is my Big 12 arrogance, considering I don't follow this conference as closely as I probably should. But what Arizona State has done the last 4 to 5 weeks has been nothing short of amazing. I mean, they were a 2 to 3 win team a year ago, and Dillingham has them in the right direction. He's literally begging people to come to games because he's realizing that he's building something special at Arizona State. And you really can't fault him for that. I mean, he's doing what he needs to do as a coach to build a program that's on the rise, very, very similarly to what Brett Bielema is doing at Illinois. We'll get to Illinois in a little bit, but I think Arizona State has that same Cinderella type story to where if they can win this Big 12 championship, it's really going to prove a lot of people wrong. So give me Arizona State to win this game by about 10 points. We're going to say 36-26 is going to be the final score here. I think Arizona State does enough to win the game. The question is going to be: is will the Big 12 be one of the few conferences on the outside looking in? That's going to be a major question depending on what the committee decides to do with teams like Indiana, Miami, Ohio State, Georgia, and so much more. So it all remains to be seen. The game is to play out first, but I think if Arizona State can win impressively, they'll do enough to show the committee that they deserve at least a shot to get into the college football playoff, even if it is as a lower seeded team, and potentially even getting a home playoff game based on other outcomes. So give me Arizona State to win this one. Now we're going to move over to Zain Zinger, though, and this is going to be fun because I've been waiting to talk about this for quite a while now. We're going to talk about what people are now dubbing as flag planting. So for those of you who don't know, Michigan upset Ohio State 13-10. It's Michigan's fourth consecutive win against the Buckeyes. This time it was in Columbus. As I alluded to earlier in the show, Ohio State had a win-in scenario where if they beat Michigan, they were in the Big Ten championship. Obviously, they lost. So, of course, it puts Ryan Day in a huge detriment. His seat is super warm. And, of course, to make matters even crazier, Michigan decided to rub salt in the wound by planting their coveted M flag at midfield in Columbus, which really did rub people the wrong way. And I understand there's a lot of people talking about sportsmanship and act like you've been there before and stuff like that. I'm just going to be very, very clear, okay? I'll be the first to admit that outside of stopping at the high school level, I was never a manager of a football program again. But I can tell you this: that when a tense rivalry game pisses a team off, it hurts their soul. I've seen it directly. And for Michigan to act the way that they did, to feel like there was a sense of validation for the horrible season in which they had under first-year coach Sharon Moore. I'm just going to be blunt. This season was terrible. They had quarterback issues up the wazoo. Their offense was abysmal, and they were losing games they shouldn't have been losing, including to a Washington team earlier in the year that I don't think, frankly, is all that good. So to beat Ohio State in the way that they did, I think they deserve to celebrate and some. I'm not insinuating that they should have been violent at all in any way, but this is Ohio State versus Michigan. These two teams have played each other for over 100 plus years. There's always bad blood. You got to throw the records out. This is a rivalry game, and I feel like both of these teams deserve to be as passionate as they want to be. And you got to give credit to linebacker Jack Sawyer for Ohio State. He was pissed that his opposing rival decided, oh, we're going to take over your field. Him saying, oh, we're never going to let that happen again. It's exactly what he's supposed to do to defend his guys. So I think this whole thing has been blown completely out of proportion. I think people need to pipe down. This is college football rivalry week. This is what makes the sport exciting. And I understand there's some, political correctness or whatever the heck you want to call it. But at the end of the day, this was good old fashioned college football. And if you did, and if you didn't even remotely, if you weren't even remotely intrigued by this, I'm sorry. I think I can say with confidence that you aren't truly a fan of the sport. If you don't realize that flag planting is just part of the fun. By the way, not to mention Steve Sarkisian, the coach at Texas, being super hypocritical, him running after his guys for not dancing on the A&M logo. The same team that went to Michigan in early September beat Michigan and planted the flag like it was no big deal. If that isn't hypocrisy, I don't know what is. I just want to make it clear both sides can have their argument. If I'm an Ohio State fan, I'm livid. If I'm a Michigan fan, I absolutely love it. Someone, as someone who doesn't have a dog in the fight, to me it's just pure entertainment. It made me want to watch the video over and over and over again, and it made me feel even more confident that the scrutinization of Ryan Day and what he has failed to do as Ohio State's head coach. He's 66-9 against the conference, and 4 of those losses are to Michigan. I'm sorry. If you can't beat Michigan in the biggest game of the year, regardless of what your record is, maybe it's time to be he's shown the door. So I think these next few weeks for Ohio State are going to be very interesting. People are hot on his ass right now, and they should be. And it's just inexcusable to lose to a 6-5 Michigan team that had no business being in that game. So if you can't tell, I was pretty intrigued by this whole thing, and I think it made me a fan of the rivalry even more because that stuff is truly personal. That's not fabricated. That's not fake. Those two teams genuinely can't stand each other, and you can't ask for much more in sports than a rivalry that brings people together, and that one clearly does, in my opinion. So I was a huge fan of it. 100%. Now we're going to transition over to the NFL. We've got week 14 coming up. The Bears travel to San Francisco. It's the first game of the Thomas Brown era. I bet it's more than likely going to be brief here. But I do think the Bears have an opportunity to salvage their season at least a little bit, and I'm going to tell you why. The 49ers struggled in the snow, got blown out by the Bills. Christian McCaffrey looks like he's going to be out about 6 weeks. The 49ers are depleted at several positions. If there was 1 week where the Bears have a chance to win, it's this week. And I think the Bears needed a fresh start. I think Thomas Brown is more than likely the best leader that the Bears currently have at Hallis Hall at the moment. And I'm actually going to take the Bears. I think this is one of the few games that the Bears can win the remainder of the year. And I think Thomas Brown is going to light a fire under his guys, that he knows that this is an audition. He may not be the head coach next season, but he very much well could be a part of this staff in some capacity. So he knows every single game, win or lose, matters, and he knows that if the Bears, as long as they are competitive and competent, he should be okay to potentially win this one. So we're going to go Bears to pull off the upset here, 30-27. I think Caleb Williams is another very, very good game, and I think he does enough to put Cairo Santos in a position to win in the final seconds of the fourth quarter. And just to give my brief thoughts too on Matt Eberflus' firing, simply put, this one didn't work out. He seems like a very good guy, but I think based on what Bears management and ownership has said about this situation, I think part of the reason why they hadn't come to a decision yet is because they were waiting to see what Eberflus said at his final press conference. And after he said, the crazy thing that he said where he felt he handled the end of the Detroit game the right way, I think that was the final straw. So that's one of the main reasons why I think Eberflus was ultimately let go, was not only just the on-field performance, but also the way he conducted himself afterwards. So those are my brief thoughts on that. Going to quickly transition over to last week in college football. I was at this game. Illinois defeated Northwestern 38-28, clinching its best season since 2007 and the second 8-win or more season in the Brett Bielema era. Illinois finishes the regular season 9-3. Again, a huge win to regain the Land of Lincoln trophy. Illinois looked amazing. Aiden Lawfrey had a very, very nice day running the football. Had some huge turnovers from the Illini perspective there. Really controlled the second half immensely well against a Northwestern team that had really struggled offensively for most of the year. So this was a great win for Illinois. It gets them back to feeling like, okay, we have a chance to be relevant in the years to come. And, to win a game in an environment like Wrigley Field, where it was a de facto Illinois home game, me being there, I can attest it was the majority Illinois fans. So it was very, very cool to see. And, I just think Illinois had a very, very solid day. I think Pat Bryant had a great day. Receiving wise, Altmaier struggled in the first half, but was able to calm down in the second half. And then, of course, Illinois was able to get stops when they needed to win this game and really solidify themselves as one of the best 3-loss teams in the country. And, I got to give a shout out to Brett Bielema. He's really defending his guys. He's talking to Lane Kiffin directly about, should 3 loss teams be considered. He's trying to give his team a case, and I don't blame him. I mean, the numbers don't lie. The record against the teams that Illinois has lost to is 26-5, which is one of the best, if not the best, in the nation. So you can't fully blame um, Brett for using the data to his advantage. But I think the big issue here is I think the loss to Minnesota really did them in. Minnesota was not the greatest team this year. They are a bowl eligible team, and that's great. But to lose at home was tough. And I think there's a difference between 10-2 versus 9-3. So even though I'm one of the biggest Illinois supporters you'll ever meet, even I know that 9-3, I think in this playoff field is not going to cut it. But then again, it goes back to the other argument of SEC bias. So it really depends on what side of the fence you sit on for that. Looking at the side of Northwestern, it's going to be a complete rebuild year next year. They're losing over half the roster. David Braun just had a bad season. They had injuries everywhere. Couldn't figure out what their quarterback situation is. Jack Lowe struggled down the stretch. This was one of the worst offenses in the FBS period. This was just one of those games where they need to chalk it up. And, obviously they finished 4-8, so they need to really go back to the drawing board, and hopefully they can do that, with investments in NIL and that sort of thing. And, hopefully they can get a quarterback soon that can really be a better game manager than what Lausch and or Wright were. So that'll be interesting. And of course, Northwestern has a very tough schedule, so they need to make sure they're ready to go, because I feel like similar things may happen unless they quickly turn it around. So I'm not hopeful for the future of Northwestern, but I am very hopeful for the future of Illinois. I think that Brett Bielema is doing a great job, and I think a bull berth obviously is justified. To go from 5-7 to 9-3, I think is very impressive. Illinois has not had back-to-back winning seasons in over a decade. They'll have a chance to do that next year. So I really do think Brett has his team moving in the right direction. And speaking in the right direction, Illinois more than likely will be playing in the Citrus Bowl. The question is going to be, who are they going to play? So I think it's going to come down to which SEC team gets left out of the college football playoff. I've seen projections anywhere from Alabama to South Carolina to Tennessee. I think regardless of who Illinois plays, they'll be ready to go. I think there's mutual respect between South Carolina and Illinois. Brett's complimented South Carolina several times. He thinks they're one of the best 9-3 teams in the country. I think that would be a great matchup. Alabama would also be a great matchup. Kalen DeBoer is doing a pretty solid job at Alabama so far. And Tennessee, I think, is one of those teams that's very underrated, but that team should be able to make the playoff based on their strength of resume as well. So more than likely bank on Illinois either playing South Carolina or potentially Alabama if Alabama falls short of a playoff bid. So I think regardless, Illinois will be playing a tough SEC opponent, and I think the Citrus Bowl will be the most watched non-college football playoff game of the entire bowl slate, considering that Illinois, or just considering that is the highest rated non-CFP game that you could possibly play in. So that'll be very, very exciting as well. Just want to know, hey, you guys know too, this is now the part of the show where we are going to transition into talking about UFC 310. But to do that, we're going to bring on a familiar guest, a guest that we've had on before. We're going to bring on UFC Fight Pass personality Nick Kalikas to preview the card. So stay tuned for that interview in just a minute, and then we're going to come back and finish up the remainder of the show before I let all of you guys move on with the rest of your week. So thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the interview. All right, now we're going to transition into talking about UFC 310, which takes place this Saturday in Las Vegas, Nevada, headlined by a flyweight title fight between Alexandre Pantoja and Kaya Sakura. And here to come along with me to talk about these fights, as that you may have seen before, Nick Kalikas. Nick, welcome back to Bando's Breakdown.
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate being here.
Of course, for those of you who don't know, you can follow Nick Kalikas across social media at Fight Odds. And Nick, where else can people find your work outside of social media as well?
They can head over to UFC Fight Pass. We have a couple shows that we do on UFC Fight Pass that are gambling related. We cover the UFC fights. We have actually 2 this week that are coming up. We're filming live on Wednesday from the UFC Apex for UFC On the Line for this card coming up for UFC 310. And then we also have the Gambler's Perspective podcast, which is available on UFC Fight Pass as well. We're filming that on Thursday, so it should be available Thursday evening or maybe even Friday morning for that one. But look for UFC On the Line on Wednesday.
Outstanding. So if you want all your gambling tips and advice, be sure to check those 2 out. And with Christmas around the corner, it might be a good time to subscribe to UFC Fight Pass anyway, because that's already included. So that's good to know. All right, so now we're going to get into the UFC 310 preview, which I just alluded to, is this Saturday. It's the last UFC pay-per-view of 2024. Let's start with the main event here, because it's a main event that I don't think a lot of people were expecting to headline the card, but given scheduling reshuffles and everything else, just kind of what are your early thoughts on the fight, and to just give me a little bit of a breakdown of it.
Sure, man. I'll tell you what, it's a great fight. And it's not very often that you see a promotional debuter coming in and fighting for a title. So that tells you how much of a quality and respected title contender Asakura is, really, that's stepping in from Ryzen into the UFC and getting an immediate title shot. So for me, that's exciting alone, because we don't see that happen very often. So you know it's going to be a doozy. And then you look at his fighting style. I mean, this guy is tremendous on the feet. He's fun to watch. He's got awesome knockout power. His wrestling and takedown defense has improved tremendously. He's actually dropping down to what should be a better weight class for him at flyweight. So there's a lot to like about this contender that people might not know about. And of course, on the other side of things, I mean, Pantoja has just been amazing. He deserved to wear that strap. He's put on performance after performance for us. He's like a zombie in some ways, like meaning that you hit this guy, he just keeps on walking forward and accomplishes what he needs to do. So Pantoja is just amazing, such a well-rounded fighter. So I'm expecting fireworks. This is going to be a fun main event.
Sure, and I guess for those who maybe haven't seen Kai Asakura before, given that he's been in other promotions, which is Ryzen, let's say for those of you who are seeing him for the first time, what do you think is his biggest attribute that makes him stand out? Because I've seen a lot of banter online. Some people believe that he deserved the title shot right away, while other people didn't. Just kind of where do you stand on that? And do you believe that he's deserving of the shot in his first fight in the UFC, just given how rare that typically is?
Yeah, it's tough. I guess I could see both sides of the argument a little bit. Because, you look at his resume, he has been knocked out by a few opponents. I mean, Kopp is one of them. Horiguchi, a former UFC fighter as well, even though he's got to win over Horiguchi. So, and he's got to win over Kopp. I believe he split with those gentlemen outside of the UFC. Yep. So, which is amazing. It's tremendous to do. But, I mean, those guys are not obviously in the UFC getting title shots. Kopp is, but he's not right there at the title shot quite yet. So this guy jumping in line, so to speak, I think it does probably wrinkle some feathers. But again, if you look at his performances as of late, and he's another one of these guys that just continues to get better in real time. I mean, he's absorbing all the quality training that he's getting overseas, and really his takedown defense and his exciting stand-up is what gets him and sets him apart from everybody. So I think win or lose here, he's not going to not deliver, if that makes sense. This fight's going to be such an exciting fight. I think fans are going to be okay with it regardless of it. I think he deserves to be here because of the excitement that he brings to the table, and he is one of the best in the world. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that as well. And just given Pantoja's body of work, I mean, he's only been the champion for a little bit. And if he can win, if he can defend his title a few more times, I think you're going to start to talk about him as maybe a top 3, top 4 flyweight in divisional history. So that's a very, very good point to bring up there. I've seen a lot of different leans on this fight, but it seems to me that the majority of the public, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, it seems that the majority of the public is on Pantoja. I know that you probably can't give me a direct lean, but for anybody who's looking to potentially put action on this fight, what should they look out for? And I guess also to kind of follow up on that, what should they be careful of, considering that there tends to be kind of a common trend of flyweight title fights or non-title fights going the distance. So I guess what should people expect?
Yeah, no, this one I think is going to be a little bit more dangerous to go the distance because, again, Asakura has been knocked out in the past. Even though Pantoja doesn't have that crazy knockout power, I still think he's capable of putting a flurry together and getting him out of there. So I think that's why it's going to be so exciting, because the takedown defense is going to come into play. I don't think Pantoja is going to have an easy time taking Asakura down. So we're going to see some excitement on the feet. Now, as far as durability and toughness goes, if Pantoja can't get him out of there on the feet, then there's a chance this thing could go over the total. So and that's a little bit of a dangerous spot too, because I think you're going to see so much firepower here that it's hard to lay kind of chalk even on the over right now. So I would probably stay away from it. And I would not lay the chalk on Pantoja either on that side of it. He is the public side. You're absolutely right. A lot more bets and parlays are coming in on the Pantoja side. But Asakura is so dangerous that I can't justify laying the chalk against a guy like that. I mean, like I said, he's going to be motivated. He's going to be ready for this title fight. It's a special opportunity for him. And he's so capable of pulling off this upset that you shouldn't lay that juice, honestly. So it's a dog or pass situation. Honestly, I'm probably not even going to have a bet on this fight. If so, I might look for Asakura inside the distance or by knockout. It's probably by knockout. I don't think he subs him. So maybe that way, so you get a little bit better odds on how he probably gets it done if he does, which would be Asakura by knockout. But outside of that, I'm not going to have a big play on this main event. It's a tough one, but I will enjoy the main event because it's going to be a good fight for sure.
For sure. It's definitely going to be a good one for sure. And even though it's not the star-studded main event for December like the UFC usually puts together, I think it's a good enough fight to where, if you don't follow the flyweight division as often, this is like a perfect reintroduction fight. So you're 100% and right there.
Absolutely.
Looking over to the co-main event now, it's a 5-round welterweight title eliminator, undefeated versus undefeated, Ian Gary versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. When they made this fight on short notice, I was very excited for it because Shavkat needed an opponent, and even just kind of where Ian Gary is at in the division and how he's calling everybody out. To me, this seemed like the perfect fight given the scenario at stake. What about you?
I love it. I mean, I absolutely love this fight. You're right, because look, again, the main event might not be getting the respect, like you said. It's usually a little bit maybe more star power, whatever the case may be. But coming in with a co-main event underneath it like this, which again might not be, I guess, on everybody's radar as much as the diehards like you and I and everybody else watching this show. We know what to expect between Ian Gary and Rakhmonov. It's going to be such a good fight. And, it's almost sad that they're matching these guys up together right now, because you hate to see either one of them get a loss because they've been so good. But at the same time, it's so exciting again, because I do think that this is going to be a really good fight. Obviously, everybody's on Rakhmonov. Look at the line. I mean, he's sitting at like minus 350-ish over Ian Gary. You're not going to see that very often. So the respect is definitely on Rakhmonov as a huge favorite. I don't necessarily agree, though, man. I think this is going to be more competitive than everybody thinks.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you as well. And once I saw that line, I was very, very surprised. And even though Ian Gary, to some people has not looked very exciting in his last few fights, last I checked, an undefeated record is an undefeated record. So you have to give him the props he deserves there. I just feel like too, I think it's a dangerous fight for both guys, considering that, A, it's a 5-round fight, and B, considering, that the UFC probably knows when Bilal Muhammad's going to be 100% from his injury. It's almost like, okay, are either of these guys either going to take enough damage to where they can't fulfill a quick turnaround, or the welterweight division might be stagnant. So it's just one of those risky fights where you don't know how it's going to go. So
100%. For this fight, it's a dog and pat situation for me. I think Ian Gary is being a little bit disrespected. There's a lot of rumors flying around about them training together. There's some footage out there as well, which actually doesn't make Gary look bad. But again, there's more to it than a sparring session. So that's what people have to understand. In sparring, you're going to respect your opponent. You're kind of helping each other out. You're trying to different things. So that's not always going to tell the true story. But again, with the rumors floating around and the possibility, there's people speculating that Rakhmonov possibly knocked Gary out in practice. So I think that has a little bit of an impact on the line as well. It's inflated a little bit. But let me tell you this. If that is not the case and Rakhmonov cannot knock Gary out of here, I think it's going to be difficult to beat him on the ground, even though, Rakhmonov has a very good ground game. I think Ian Gary is going to be game enough and defensively sound enough to be okay, I think, on the ground. And then on the feet, I think Ian Gary can honestly be technical enough to kind of pick him apart. A lot of people are going to look back at that Venom Page fight and not be very impressed with Ian Gary. But the truth is, Venom Page is such a difficult stylistic matchup for most people in the division, especially strikers, that it's just a different look. So he's going to make you look bad. I don't necessarily take that like as a bad L, even though he won the fight for Ian Gary. I look at it as just a different type of opponent. And you have to, if you're going to be at the top of the food chain, the top of the game, you have to adapt to everybody they put in front of you. And he's done that. Now, Rachmanov, on the other hand, has just ran through everybody. That's the problem. He's going out here just destroying the competition. So everybody just believes he's going to continue that with Ian Gary. I'm not so sure about that. I think Ian Gary will test him, and I think Ian Gary has a good shot to win this fight. There's no question.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where, and I'm sure you probably agree with this, the one guy that's going to make the first mistake is more than likely going to lose the fight. So that's a very good point. Just moving down the card here, this is a bit of a rebooking. We got Sterling taking on Alexander Volkov. These guys obviously know each other pretty well. These two were supposed to fight in Abu Dhabi. The fight has since been moved to this card. Based on your analysis from when they were originally scheduled to fight until now, has anything changed, and what do you think of this fight overall?
I love this fight. I love the rematch. I bet Gane the first time. He was a much shorter price. And, obviously I won the bet. He looked good in that fight against Volkov. I thought Volkov didn't look the same in that fight, which I was glad he didn't look the same because I faded him in that fight. I was against him. So, but that being said, I think we've seen a resurgence, so to speak, of Volkov coming. And I think he's looked really good. I think he's not going to be, he was a little bit timid, I think, the first time around when they met. I don't think he's going to be this time around. I mean, we saw what he did against Pavlovich. Pavlovich is one of the hardest hitters in all of combat sports, period. This guy has such heavy hands, and Volkov fought such a smart game plan, and he was able to win that fight. So I think he's going to take a lot out of that. Gane's a different stylistic type of fighter than Pavlovich, but at the same time, I think we're going to see a better version of Volkov right now than we did the first time around. So for me, I think the line is escalated and inflated a little bit too much. I think you got to look at the dog here as well. Volkov might not be getting the respect he deserves in this fight. I think it's going to be closer than the first one. And with the state of MMA judging these days, man, you cannot be laying heavy chalk on a competitive fight. So for me, again, even though I bet Gane the first time and he won rightfully so, and I expect him to kind of edge this one out too, I still think at the current betting line, you look at Volkov or leave it alone.
Yeah, I'd say it's fair to say too. And then again, I think something that I think you touched on briefly, but I'll just expand upon it. You also don't know, what it's like for either of these guys to, get back in the same camp again after the fight initially fell through. So I think as it gets closer to Thursday, Friday, or even fight night, we'll really know what shape either of these guys are in before it'll feel definitive, if you will. So that's a very good point.
And then what you said with that, I think both of them are professional enough that they're going to be okay. I don't think like the time lapse in between, whatever the case may be, I don't think it's going to impact them all that much, to be honest with you. I think
no, for sure. And we have another fight that I think a lot of people were a little bit confused, ended up on the main card, but it ended up, or anyway, we got Bryce Mitchell taking on Kron Gracie, and there seems to be a huge debate as to how this fight could potentially go. What do you see? What do you see in this one?
Man, this is crazy for me, to be honest with you. I mean, obviously you're seeing the line right now. Bryce Mitchell is off the roof, like through the charts as far as a chalky favorite. This is a UFC fight. If this is a pure traditional grappling match, obviously Kron Gracie, you have to give him a lot of respect. I think he's more than capable of pulling off a win in a jiu-jitsu match. But the problem is, and again, in the UFC, Mitchell's been pretty good. His striking keeps developing, even though, it's not quite where you want it to be. But they look at the other side of it. There's Kron Gracie's. So I think you look at here, Mitchell in a UFC fight does have the advantage here, but I couldn't trust it to lay that chalk either. So for me, I think you got to look at Kron Gracie or leave it alone. And I'm not even tempted to look at Kron Gracie. I think this is a very strange, and not a fight that's, I think, on my radar as far as like one I'm dying to watch. Kind of, it's just gonna be intriguing the way it plays out. Maybe the ground scrambles, stuff like that. For a pure jiu-jitsu practitioner, we might see some fun things. Or we could see maybe a boring, sloppy stand-up fight, because a lot of times what you do see with two grapplers is they end up standing up, and so if that's the case, I'm not sure. This is kind of a hot mess for me, to be honest with you. I don't know if Bryce Mitchell should be this big of a favorite, but he should be favored definitely in the UFC cage.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of mixed reactions on both sides. So I think it's one of those fights where even though he is such a heavy favorite, it's one of those fights where you can flip a coin and you still don't know how it's going to play out, because Bryce Mitchell could go in, overestimating Kron Gracie and get caught with something, or Mitchell could go in there within the first 6 minutes and the fight's over. You don't know. So
100%. Yeah, that's why it's dangerous. Don't lay. So far, all these fights that we talked about, I think it's too risky to lay the chalk. I really do. I think there's much better spots. Again, maybe on this card or moving on. There's going to be, I know this is the last big UFC event, whatever the case may be of the year, but there's plenty more MMA action and betting to come here in the next several months. So you don't have to unload on this card if it's a difficult one.
For sure. In the final fight we're going to discuss before I let you go, and thank you so much for your time. Opening the main card, we got Nate Land. We're taking on Duo Choi. What are your thoughts on this one?
Durability. This is the thing. I mean, who's going to be the more durable fighter here is probably going to win, because it's going to be an all-out war. It is. Choi's a sniper. I think I like his striking. It's just, again, when he gets in these firefights, sometimes it's hard to trust. And Landwehr's been in them time and time again. He's worked, but he somehow hangs on and ends up making it a tough fighter, pulling off the win. So this has fight of the night written all over it as well. A lot of these fights are going to be really good. But for me, it's a tough one, man. I think you got to favor Landwehr, obviously, a little bit, but it's, again, another one that can kind of go back and forth a little bit. It all depends on Choi's durability. I think if Choi's durability holds up, he can pull off the win. But obviously, that's kind of a question mark, because we've seen, his chin not really sustain. So, but it's a great opening card fight, for all us fans to open a pay-per-view with, because, somebody's probably going to get decked and knocked out in this fight.
And honestly, it was very, very good to get your analysis, just considering that I don't think UFC 310 is getting the respect that it could or it deserves. So, and it was very, very, very nice to be able to preview this card with you. And obviously, this is the last major UFC pay-per-view of the year. We get at UFC Tampa in about a week or so with a very intriguing main event there. But I think, given the hand that the UFC was, they did the best they could, and I feel like you and I are in agreement that the top three fights are fantastic. So
100%. And then you got some sleepers on the prelims portion of the card. Look, Anthony Smith versus Dominic Reyes is going to be intriguing, because we don't know where either guy is in their career. And then, of course, Luque's on the card. Aljamain Sterling. We didn't talk about Aljamain Sterling and Evloev. That's going to be an amazing fight, too. So I know, again, it's not a top-heavy card that a lot of people are like, oh, my God, this pay-per-view is amazing. But if you look at it from top to bottom, I mean, I'm even staring at Randy Brown versus Brian Battle. That's going to be a fun fight. So legitly, this is going to be an awesome UFC card, a fun one, and well worth the purchase, 100%.
Well, thank you again, Nick, for your time. It's always a pleasure as usual, and I hope to be doing this many more times as we get closer and closer and into 2025. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, man. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to be on with you as well, Zain. Thank you. Happy holidays to all of you guys out there. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you guys soon. Thank you.
You too. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you again for tuning in to the interview with Nick Kalikas. It really is a pleasure to be able to get just a few minutes of his time every so often to talk about the UFC. He's one of the good guys in the industry. So thank you again, Nick, for your time. It is very much appreciated. I hope you enjoyed the fights. And before we move into the remainder of the show, I just wanted to say thank you guys for rolling with me for I guess the remainder of this time. I mean, I started this show in April, didn't really know where it was going to go, and now that we're 30 plus episodes in, I can't say that I'm tired of this yet. So I'm excited to bring you more content as the remainder of this year closes out and into 2025. So I just wanted to take a second to do that. All right, let's move into the end of the show now. We've got the second Zinger, so Zinger Part 2. Just wanted to give you a brief, just quick thoughts. I never really got a chance to do this yet. But Conor McGregor, in my opinion, can only blame himself for his recent legal troubles. His legal troubles are well documented now. I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to go into him as a person at the moment. I think, looking back on all this stuff, he ruined his career. I think the Floyd Mayweather fight, you could make the solid argument, and that's what I'm going to do now, is the Floyd Mayweather fight ruined him. The money he made from that fight was absurd, number one. Number two, he did not fight for over a year, then lost to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Then obviously the legal troubles occurred, which are now officially public. And then from there, he just wasn't the same fighter again. He's won one fight in 4 years. The last time he won a meaningful fight was in November of 2016. At this point, his career is at a crossroads. He could choose to retire, move on with his life. No one would really care, or he could choose to fight these battle demons, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I mean, overall, I mean, this has just been a really disappointing I guess, stretch of years for him. The only thing I can say is hopefully he gets the help he deserves. He shouldn't be focused on fighting right now. He should be focused on bettering himself. And I mean, that's really all I can say. I just feel bad for everybody involved. And I think some people in the MMA community, their priorities are not straight based on the things that they are focusing on that they shouldn't be, because the last thing that you should be talking about is when his next fight is. It's going to be, can he better himself to come back from this and not just admit that he made mistakes, but actually try to do better overall holistically. So I think that's where I'd like to leave it there. All right, now let's move into Zain's look ahead just very quickly. It's the last segment of the show for this week. We're just going to briefly go over who is playing in the NFL this upcoming weekend. The NFL is getting very, very close to the end of the regular season. We only have a couple weeks to go. We've got the Packers and the Lions on Thursday night, Saints and the Giants, Jaguars and the Titans, Panthers and the Eagles, Seahawks and the Cardinals, Bills and the Rams, Bengals and the Cowboys, the Browns and the Steelers, the Jets and the Dolphins, Atlanta and Minnesota. Rematch of the Super Bowl from 2002, the Raiders and the Bucks, the Bears and the 49ers, and the Chargers and the Chiefs. Just for some context against the spread last week, I went 11-0-5. Overall, I went undefeated at 16-0. So we're going to try to keep that rolling here as we move along. You'll get my picks on this week's edition a little later on in Bando's Blitz, so stay tuned for that. That's gonna do it though for another edition of Bando's Breakdowns. We didn't have any errors today, which is very good. And I just wanted to say thank you again for tuning into another episode. Couldn't do this without any of you guys. This has been episode 32. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I hope to talk to you guys soon. Have a good one.